Welcome back for another update on Marcelina, my Reliance 44 sailboat rebuild project. Well, it's been a while since I've given you a progress report, so we'll have a bit of ground to cover. In this video, we'll be covering preparations for the new chain plates, closing up the fuel tanks, the progress that's being made on the interior, the last stages of painting the deck, preparing to reinstall the tow rail, and just for fun, another use for rigging. Okay, chain plate preparations. Well, first, here they are, fresh from Schaefer Marine in all their shiny 316 stainless steel glory, the new chain plates. I used a free online program called Google SketchUp to design the chain plates, including the angle of bend in each to align with the stays that they support. I checked and rechecked all the angles, the load requirements, and the mounting positions, but you never know for sure until they're installed and tested. Let's hope I got it right. As I've shown before, the mounting points for the chain plates, which were originally internal to the hull with the chain plates themselves extending through the deck, now will be supported by adding 3/4 inch G10 to the inside of the hull with 6 layers of 1708 biaxial fiberglass to spread the load over a large area of the hull. I've completed the last of this reinforcement, which includes the supports for the mizzen mast and the mainmast backstay, which, by the way, extended to just inside the fuel tanks. The new backstay supports are in line with the originals but are completely above the fuel tanks. Speaking of fuel tanks, I've closed up the access hole that I had to cut in the side of both the port and starboard tanks by epoxying the plywood back in place. I also added access ports to the top of each tank. As well as vents. Because the two tanks are plumbed together at a T with a single line then going to the engine, I'll need to add a one-way valve to each of the lines coming from the fuel tanks so that fuel from one tank doesn't flow into the other tank when the boat is heeled, which would, in this case, cause the fuel to flow out the vent. Interior progress is in the hands of my cabinet maker, and he's making steady advances over the last couple of months. I did the tabbing in of the vertical and horizontal support pieces that contact the hull, and he's roughed in most of the cabinetry. He's also applied what's called okuma, a thin, flexible wood sheet that will make up the finished wall covering of much of the cabin. And while the interior work was being done, I've all but finished painting the deck. As I showed before, once the deck was completely painted with a shiny layer of all grip paint, I taped off the areas that will get non-skid surface, which is most of the deck. The non-skid areas are then sanded to ensure adhesion of the next paint layer and then painted. And while this paint is still wet, I completely cover the surface with a rubberized sand and then blow off the excess. Once this cures, I put 3 layers of paint over the rubberized sand, each layer within about 12 hours of the previous layer to ensure a good bond. Each of the 3 layers contains a flattening agent so that the finished surface is not shiny. One reason for not wanting a shiny surface is to help hide surface defects, but the most important reason is to reduce sun glare. And speaking of sun glare, you can see that I'm not going with a typical white deck. Some sailors use a slightly darker color to reduce the brightness of the deck in direct sunlight. Often this is done with kind of a tannish color, but I've opted for a light gray. In this case, All Grip's Kingston Gray. I've also read about sailors experimenting with various shades of color to reduce the brightness without making it so dark that it gets uncomfortably hot. I'm just guessing that the Kingston Gray is about right, but time will tell. I also like the gray because I'm either going to paint the hull navy blue or Arctic red, and the gray will complement either one. Do you have a preference? let me know your thoughts in the comments. You can also see here, because I waited so long, in much of the case, to take the tape off, that I ended up nicking the paint in a few locations. So I had to end up touching up these spots to make it look decent. I do have one small area in the cockpit left to apply the non-skid, but otherwise I'm ready to put the tow rail back on. One thing I've done is to seal up the slots between the hull and the deck, left from having to cut off some of the bolts holding the tow rail in place. I'm using a polyurethane sealant here because I shouldn't, I hope, ever have to open up this joint. Cleaning off the old sealant, the old silicone sealant from the tow rail, was quite a chore. Here you can see I'm scraping inch by inch and then sanding the residue off to make it completely clean so it seals properly. I had to do this for all 88 feet of the tow rail, which obviously took quite a bit of time. For the tow rail itself, I'm sealing the bolts with butyl tape. I put a piece between the tow rail and the deck and then wrap another piece of butyl around the head of each bolt. Tightening the bolt from below should seal up everything nice and tight. I chose butyl tape here because it's an excellent moisture seal. It remains pliable essentially forever, and it won't create a strong adhesive bond to the deck or tow rail in case I ever want or need to remove a section of the rail. As I mentioned in the beginning, I found a unique use for sailboat rigging. My wife and I bought another house, and I discovered that a beam in the garage seemed to be compromised when the previous owners had cut out the bottom portion of the beam to install a garage door opener. Since I'm going to be replacing all the standing rigging on my boat anyway, I decided to pilfer a stay and associated connecting hardware, mated it to some steel bars, and used it to reinforce the beam. I did have to buy a couple of Hain high mod compression fittings, which I found very easy to install. I'm glad I did this because I was planning on using the high mod fittings for all the new fittings on my boat, and it was good to have at least a little experience with them before I drop a few grand on all new fittings. Oh, and one more thing. My son, a member of the New York Air National Guard, is back from his tour in Afghanistan. We're very proud of him and also very happy to have him home. I know he's used to doing critical work on million-dollar aircraft, but maybe I can convince him to help turn a few wrenches on my little project. Well, that's it for now. Please leave me questions and comments below, and I'll be back in a month or two with another update on Marcelina. Thanks.